Hey guys, I'm Kate from Venison for Dinner, and my sister Anna here is joining me at a safe social distancing 6 feet apart. And today we're going to talk to you about cold season gardening. We live in a zone 2-3 for Canadian zones or 3-4 for US zones. And Anna has been gardening here for 12 years.
Yeah.
So she has so much School of Hard Knocks knowledge.
Killed so many things from frost. Early frost, late frost, all the frost.
That she asked me if we could do some videos today so that we could talk with you guys about this, because in light of current world events, so many people are turning to growing their own food, and if you live in a cold season, it can feel intimidating, the fact that you can't grow things like tomatoes and peppers and melons and squashes without a lot of serious help.
So here in zone 3, I'm just going to use zone 3 because that's an average here, and it's both applicable to the Americans and Canadians.
What does zone 3 mean if you're new to gardening zones?
So your zone is rated by not your average last frost date and your first frost date. Most people will throw out, hey, my last frost is May 15th. What zone am I? That's actually not relevant to your zone. Your zone is related to the depth of cold you get in the winter time and the duration of cold. So there's some people who might not get the super cold winters that we have, but they still have late frosts. We're not necessarily dealing with the cold here right now in this video. We're going to be talking about the short frost-free window that we have here in zone 3.
So what is our frost-free window?
Right now in the Bulkley Valley, can I say where we're from?
Yeah.
Our average,
Just don't give our addresses.
our average last frost date is June 7th. Our average first frost date is September 7th. So that does not leave much time. We've also had frosts as early as
3 months? That's really our only frost-free window? Oh man.
It's actually more like 75 days sometimes. It's pretty pitiful. We will get frosts mid-June, and we've had frosts around my birthday, which is the end of August. So that does not give you a lot of time to grow frost-free things. So I've spent a lot of years killing things with the frost, and recently I've come to appreciate the cold hardy annuals. In this day and age, most seed catalogs only talk about annuals and perennials. An annual is something that dies off every year, where a perennial will keep on living for years to come.
How I remember that is perennial is a longer word, so the plants last longer.
But what has become lost and not as much common knowledge these days is the concept of hardy annuals and tender annuals. So we all know that there's things like squash plants, tomatoes, basil, and peppers that need to be planted out after all chance of frost, because frost has passed, because any bit of frost will kill them off. And if it doesn't kill them, it is going to stunt them so that they are not as productive. The tender annuals also like a lot of heat. And while we have 75 to 90 frost-free days, we don't always have a lot of heat units. If you live in Manitoba, you might have that same frost-free window, but they have really hot days and they get a lot more heat units total aggregate in that short growing window, that they can grow things like corn and squash outside that we can't really do. If our days still hover around 20 degrees, that's a lot of difference.
20 degrees Celsius is 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
Between 20 degrees and 30 degrees,
which is 90 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that makes a big difference in what your plant can achieve in that season. So here, I've found it to be very beneficial to focus on things that really thrive in the colder weather. My mother lives in a zone 8, which is about a zone 9, maybe 10 for you Americans. I should edit that out, that's rude.
For all y'all Americans, it's okay.
She lives in a zone 8 or a 9. She can grow amazing tomatoes and peppers outside with no greenhouse. She cannot for the life of her grow lettuce or cabbage or kale, and she complains that she has the trouble growing things like that, or peas.
She also can't grow zucchini, which is kind of funny because she just fails at zucchini.
It's also really humid there, and zucchini doesn't like moisture, like squash don't like moisture, they get mildew. But that is another story for another day. So, I've been learning to embrace the zone that you have. So we have a lot of weaknesses in our growing zone, but we also have a lot of strengths. So this video, we're focusing on our strength, which is your strength too if you live in a colder zone, and that is the hardy annual. So what is a hardy annual? If you live in a warmish winter, warmer zone, like a 7, 8, or 9, a hardy annual is something you will actually see overwintered a lot, which means people plant it in the fall and it stays nice and dormant, nice and healthy. You can pick it all winter long. There are tons of videos out there regarding people who overwinter broccoli, cabbage, kale, spinach.
That's cute.
That's great for those people. We are not those people. The kale kind of overwinters here if you can find it under all the snow.
I actually meant to go see how my leeks are doing.
You're kind of just eating frozen kale. It's not actually still alive. So what we do is we take that knowledge of what if you lived in a warm zone, you would plant in the fall, in the late summer, it would grow a bit and then continue its slow growing or stay nice and dormant and ready to harvest all winter long. We're going to take that concept and we're going to shift it to our zone and make it applicable to us, because our winters are too cold. They would kill those things off. So with a hardy annual, what we do is we start it. It might still need warmth to germinate and get established, but then it likes that cold period. If you planted it out in June when it was super hot and the days were long, length of daylight hours is also very important. If you took something that likes the cool and not such long daylight hours and planted it out in June, it's going to go into survival mode. It is going to go to seed. It is going to bolt. How many times of us northern gardeners have we planted spinach and bok choy out and then it immediately goes to seed when it's this tall? It's because it doesn't like that hot weather. So we're playing with those things that love the cool weather, and we're pushing the boundary of what seed companies tell you, because everyone has gotten so conservative in their estimates that we've lost this concept of planting hardy annuals out when they have that cold zone to get truly established. So you warm weather people, you plant it out in the fall. Here in zones 3, 4, 2, we're going to plant it out in the beginning of May, which is about 5 or 6 weeks before the last frost. So that's mimicking a warm region winter. Am I blowing your mind yet?
Yeah. Can you differentiate in what things can be direct seeded versus what needs to be started ahead of time?
Exactly. So when I'm picking seeds there's certain greens that germinate in cool soil. So
actually, when you're looking in a seed catalog, what are you looking for if you're looking at lettuce varieties or you're looking at pea varieties? What are you looking at to know that it's a good fit for our season?
I'm looking for short season growing, but also frost tolerant.
So how do you tell what is a short season thing?
How many days to maturity?
So every seed catalog should list how many days, and what's your goal with things?
I don't like to grow things longer than 90 days because we have a 90-day season.
So basically as short days as you can find so if you're looking at green beans, and there's green beans that are 66 days, green beans that are 72 days, and then 85 days, you're probably going to be picking the ones that are 66 and 72 over the other ones.
That's fair, but you can also look for things that were bred or developed in colder regions like yours. So I like to pick varieties that were in North or Eastern Europe because they're a lot colder. A bean that gets maturity in 75 days of hot Mediterranean Italian heat is absolutely different than a bean that can mature in temperatures that are around 20, 23, 24 degrees. That's a big difference. So it's not really potato, it's also where something was bred and what it thrives in.
So we're farther north, we're about halfway up British Columbia, which they call northern BC, but really we're like halfway up BC, British Columbia, Canada. Our day length by solstice in June, we're like 18 to 20 hours daylight a day. So while we have shorter amount of frost-free days, our days are really long.
Which is amazing. But again, it's going to trigger the hardy annuals that like the cold into going into survival mode earlier. And when something goes to seed, it's bitter, it's not growing. That's not when you want to eat it. So for intensive purposes, in this day and age, when we are talking about getting as much food supply as soon as possible locally, I'm going to talk about starting hardy annuals to plant yourself.
So with lettuce, for example, that likes to bolt, so then you would be wanting to look at ones that say things like heat resistant, slow to bolt, things like that. My in-laws, when I was growing romaine last year, and I grew a variety called Coastal Star that just loved our weather. We ate romaine after romaine. Everybody who came over, they could not leave without a head of romaine. And my in-laws are like, how do you grow this lettuce that isn't bitter? Whenever we try to grow lettuce, and they grow a lot of things for a lot of years, they can't grow lettuce. And I'm like, well, it's about making sure it hasn't bolted. So I was showing my sister-in-law in the garden, like, oh, here's lettuce that's bolted. And she had no idea on this concept of things bolting, because it didn't look like it had gone to seed, just the core had extended, so the head was no longer tight packed, it was starting to extend. And I said, now taste this. And she's like, oh yeah, that's the lettuce of my childhood.
Yeah. So when you pick seed, we look for two different varieties, and I'll pick one that likes cool soil and likes to germinate in cool weather, and that's the one you plant first. And then when it's warmer and that stuff's kind of hit its prime, you're going to plant your stuff that is slow to bolt, because you're going to stagger your harvest window. But for this video, we're talking about growing things like cabbage and broccoli, even greens, and we're going to talk about starting them in your house so that you can plant them out early and time your windows. So if something needs a bit of warmth to germinate, like pretend it's August or September down south and you're planting it out, we're going to start it a few weeks before we need to plant it out. So right now it is mid-March, and we're going to have the goal of starting something in the house 6 weeks before it needs to be planted out. So if we're planting out a hardy annual, we are going to be aiming to plant those out in the beginning of May, 6 weeks before our last frost date. So I separate my seeds into things that get planted out after the frost and things that get planted out 6 weeks before the frost. So things that get planted out after the frost get started later. If you start them all at the same time, these squashes are going to be gigantic and taking over your entire house. If you focus on right now starting things like cabbage and broccoli, they will be able to be planted out in May before they are so big that they are taking over everything. So these are two different seed spacings. You can see right here that this is what most people plant in, and this is what you would put a squash in. 12, 16 of these is going to be massive and take over your space. This is a 72 cell tray. You could start 72 broccoli or 72 cauliflower, 72 cabbage in your window, and look how much bang for your window buck you get.
I'm currently debating how I'm going to rearrange my living room to become a seed starting space.
You would literally just need 2 of these because it's only 6 weeks away. We're not growing things out right now until the end of June when it's safe to plant it out. We're growing things out that are going to get planted while it's still cool. So we can plant them in small trays and make maximum efficient space of your window space. So you're going to plant, you could plant broccoli and cabbage in here. It's going to grow, and after it's about 6 weeks old, it is well established enough that it can take a few frosts. So you are going to grow it out till it's about this big at 6 weeks old, and you are going to plant it out, which seems crazy and it messes with your mind, but you are going to plant it out.
Do you need to protect them in any way when you plant them out?
It's nice to harden it off with a bit of frost cloth, which is available on Amazon.
Do we have any in the greenhouse?
It's like a white transparent cloth. Pause video. Okay.
So this is frost cloth. It's thin, but it really it makes it so that the frost settles on top of this
and it doesn't,
and not on your plants.
So all you do is you can put a couple sticks up, drape it over like a tent, and it's gonna give your seedlings just a little bit of extra protection. So all of these little baby broccolis and cauliflowers are gonna go out when it's nice and cool, and they're gonna get really well established, and they're gonna be happy, they're gonna be thriving, and by the time the daylight gets longer and the weather gets warmer, they're going to be so well established, they're not going to just go into immediate panic mode. They're going to be producing and pumping out amazing vegetables. Last year, I started my cabbage from seed because I was stubborn. I started it later because I didn't have a lot of space. Kate bought cabbage plugs. She planted them out at the same time. She bought them from the store. They were beautiful. They were about this big. She planted them out. She had the most gorgeous big cabbage last year because they got planted out at a time where they had cool weather to get really healthy and happy.
And I really pushed it. It was early May, and my father-in-law, who's been gardening here forever, was like, you're planting too soon. You know, you planted those peas too soon. You're gonna lose your starts. You're planting too soon. Well, who was gifting everybody massive heads of broccoli and cabbage in June? Like, in the end of June, I had harvests already, and I was blowing people's mind. But guys, I was just so determined that I also didn't care if I lost some starts because I wanted to push it.
And if you took those same cabbage starts and you planted them directly out at the end of June or mid-June when it was super warm and super safe from frost, they are just gonna fry and die. My cabbage seedlings, when I started harding them out mid-May, when Kate was planting hers, they were still first baby leaves. And they fried, and I lost a couple hundred seedlings because they need to get about this big, and then they will be so happy in that cool weather. They will just flourish. Things like peas. If you wanted to get the jump, we could plant peas in this garden right now. I can just barely scrape enough dirt away. But you could also plant your peas in here, and when they're this big, because they're gonna get a jump germinating inside, so things like that warmth to germinate, but they don't actually want to live in that. As soon as they've gotten about this big, they are much happy to be out and cool. So we're going to start some peas today, and then in a few weeks we're going to plant them outside, and we're not going to plant them in the greenhouse because it will get too hot there in the day. They will be very happy planted outside.
Sorry, for a second I thought I hadn't started the video. I was like, oh no, oh no.
So it's all about taking advantage of that window and playing with it to your best ability. And if you plant things out so that you know you're going to plant them out earlier, you are being far more space efficient, and you don't need that much window space. Anybody can do it. And things like cabbage and broccoli, you can pack them in tightly because they're going to shade out the weeds. So if you pack things in nicely, you're actually helping yourself too because you're going to have less weeding to do.
So even though we're a cold zone here and you think, oh, we can't grow tomatoes, we can't grow those other things, I think we're also really fortunate that we can grow so well potatoes, cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower. Those things get you through the winter. Those are the sort of things that have a lot of belly-filling power that even though we can't, it would be nice to grow tomatoes to make tomato sauce and such, I think we're still so fortunate that we can grow these hardy things that really fill bellies.
Yeah, I think it's just all a shift of perspective, and once you realize what you can do in your zone, that it has it, what your strength is compared to anyone else that someone else doesn't have, this is a strength that we have. And by staggering out your plantings like this, you're also making less work for yourself, because then when it's your final frost date, you're not trying to plant out everything all at once. Why not get it out of the way and stagger it out? You're going to make your life way easier.
Something else I really like about our growing season is that in September, or maybe October, frost kills it all. We get covered in snow and we're done. And now we can walk away from the garden until spring. Sometimes I feel that people who have extremely long gardening seasons are more likely to get burnt out because they are forever having to garden. And us, it's so all out all summer long that by the time it hits the frost date and we get covered in snow, we're ready to throw up our hands and walk away and go make a pot of soup inside. Like,
I was just waiting for last frost last year. I was so fed up. It just kept going and going and going. And I just couldn't wait for the frost to come and kill everything.
so that is, you know, and in summer, you pretty much never see your friends because we're in a farming community. People are haying, people are gardening. It's, you know, maybe the odd time you might get to the lake with friends, but if you are in any sort of farming, you're not. And in summer, it's all go time. And then you're ready for that deep breath in winter where you can just exhale and have friends over for dinner. And that's just not something that's very easy in summer. So I think we just have to look at our pros and cons there too.
Yeah, and there's lots of resources. I know I went over a pretty big theory in a short amount of time, but there's lots of resources like Elliot Coleman, people that grow all throughout the winter, and it's in covered culture, so in greenhouses, but they have a lot of principles as far as what is frost hardy, and just looking those up can really help you. And all you do is you find your last frost date and you count back 4 to 6 weeks, and that's when you're aiming to plant something out, which means you're going to start it in your house 6 weeks before that.
So really like 12 weeks before your last frost is when you're starting things.
Yeah.
I'm going to link below. Anna's going to give me a list of books and I'm going to link them below for different resources that you can look at. But I'm also interested, if you are a cold season grower, you've been gardening in cold season, do you have any tips or hints to add here? I bet you all learned something new. I would love if you could comment with any sort of resources or tips or favorite varieties that you have to grow.
I'm struggling because I have so many thoughts that I want to get out, and I'm just struggling to keep it into like one manageable bite-sized video for you. So we might have to do more videos.